That night, she came home moving like each step was heavier than the last. Her shoulders slumped, her scrubs wrinkled as if they'd been through a war zone, her hair pulled back in a loose knot that had given up hours ago. She let her bag drop to the floor with a hollow thud, kicked off her shoes without looking at me, and murmured, "I'm exhausted," in a voice so faint it was almost swallowed by the silence of the house. I remember reaching for her, wanting to ease whatever weight she was carrying, but she only gave me a weak smile and brushed past, heading straight to the bedroom. The sound of the shower followed, steady and unbroken, but instead of comfort it left me with an uneasy knot in my stomach. I sat in the kitchen, staring at the untouched dinner I'd made hours earlier, thinking of all the nights she had come home like this lately, drained, disconnected, her eyes avoiding mine. At first, I believed her without question. Nurses work brutal hours. I told myself she was saving lives, and if that left nothing for me, it was a sacrifice I could accept. But that night, something small shifted. Maybe it was the way she clutched her phone when she walked past me, fingers tightening around it as though it held something fragile. Maybe it was how she didn't leave it charging in the kitchen like she used to. Or maybe it was a faint, lingering scent of perfume that didn't belong in a hospital ward. A sweet, warm note that didn't mix with antiseptic or latex gloves. I told myself it was my imagination, that I was tired too, and tired minds see shadows where there are none. Still, the image of her clutching that phone stayed with me, crawling into my thoughts until it became an itch I couldn't scratch. That's when I decided I couldn't just wonder anymore. I needed to know. And knowing would change everything. If you've ever laid next to someone who made you feel completely alone, then maybe this story isn't just mine, it's ours. And if that's true, subscribe. Because stories like this deserve to be heard by those who understand. That night, her phone was like an extension of her body, clutched in her hand, screen angled away from me, as if it held something too precious to share. She came home claiming she was drained, every step heavy, every word slow, like she had nothing left to give. But the truth was written in the smallest betrayals. The way her eyes lit up when the screen glowed, the quick curls at the corner of her mouth when she thought I wasn't watching, the faint, almost imperceptible hum in her chest as her fingers danced over keys. She wasn't empty. She was overflowing. Just not for me. I lay in bed, the darkness between us feeling wider than any distance we'd ever known. Every vibration of her phone thudded against my ribs, like a heartbeat that wasn't mine. I kept telling myself to let it go, to hold on to the image of the woman I married, the nurse who came home with tired hands and a heart too big for the world. But my mind kept replaying the days before, the strange perfume that lingered even after her scrubs hit the hamper, the unexplained late shifts, the way she pulled her hand away faster than before when I tried to hold it. By 2 a.m, her breathing had softened into the rhythm of sleep, but the phone never left her grasp. I leaned closer, every muscle tense, my own breath shallow. The scent was there again, floral, unfamiliar, not the sterile air of the hospital. The screen lit just enough for me to catch a preview. I wish you could see me now. I'm smiling so much it hurts. Not my name, not my words. A punch to the gut. So sudden I almost dropped the phone before I even touched it. I placed it back, my fingers trembling, my chest tight, staring up at the ceiling in the darkness. In that moment, I realized the exhaustion she brought home wasn't from the hospital at all. She wasn't tired of work. She was tired of me, and yet she still had this endless well of energy for him. The question that burned inside me wasn't just why him. It was when did she decide I was no longer worth the effort? And as I lay there, a single thought carved itself into my mind, deep and unshakable. I was going to find out exactly where her heart had gone. Even if the truth tore mine apart, I don't care about algorithms. I care about the people listening to this who are bleeding silently like I did. If you've ever held back tears just to protect someone who didn't protect you, subscribe. You don't have to do this alone anymore. She closed the door behind her with that same soft click she'd always used, gentle and deliberate. Once a sign of care, now the sound of someone slipping quietly out of the truth. I stood frozen in the kitchen, my coffee turning cold in my hands, staring through the window as she walked toward her car. There was a lightness in her steps that didn't match the words she had spoken minutes before, words drenched in exhaustion, in the imagery of long hospital corridors and relentless emergencies. Her pace wasn't that of someone drained from 12 hours in the operating room. It was the stride of someone heading toward a destination they wanted to reach. Her scrubs were neatly pressed, her hair tied just loosely enough to look casual but still deliberate, and the faint trace of perfume drifted into the hallway long after she'd gone. Something gnawed at me. She had claimed her shift would run late, that the hospital was understaffed, that patients needed her more than ever. But her work bag, the one that normally bulged with a lunchbox, thermos, and a change of shoes, looked lighter, almost empty. And then it hit me. Her hospital shoes. They were still by the door, soles worn from months of 12-hour shifts. She wasn't wearing them. My chest tightened, the air in the room suddenly thick, as my mind began rewinding the past few weeks like a film reel I hadn't wanted to watch. The sudden extra showers when she got home, the faint smell of something floral, clinging to her that wasn't from hospital soap, the way she seemed to guard her phone now, angling it away from me as if even casual glances could expose something she didn't want me to see. But it was the expression she carried, that subtle, almost unnoticeable shift in her eyes when she looked at me, that told me everything. It wasn't guilt, not yet. It was detachment, like she'd already moved somewhere I couldn't follow. My instincts screamed, but I forced them quiet, telling myself I needed proof, not paranoia. Still, every step she took away from the house felt like another thread snapping loose from the life we had built together. And in that silence, with only the echo of the closing door between us, I knew this wasn't just a strange night. It was the first undeniable fracture in the story I'd been clinging to, and that fracture was about to split wide open. Her car had barely disappeared down the street when a faint vibration on the counter pulled my attention. It was her phone. She'd forgotten it. That alone was unusual. She was glued to it these days, as if every ping or flash of light was oxygen. My hand hovered above it, my chest pounding. I knew the boundary I was about to cross. I also knew boundaries meant nothing when the ground beneath your marriage was already breaking apart. The screen lit up again. No name, just a contact save with a heart emoji. I stared, waiting for the notification to fade, but another message came. And another. The preview showed just enough to gut me. I miss you already. Tonight was perfect. My stomach twisted, so hard it felt like the floor had tilted. I told myself not to open it, to wait, to be calm, but my fingers moved as if someone else controlled them. The thread was alive, buzzing with words dripping with intimacy, not just from him, but from her. My wife, the woman who claimed she was too tired to talk when she got home, had sent laughing voice notes, selfies with eyes lit up in ways I hadn't seen in months, and paragraphs so full of energy they could have been written at sunrise after the best sleep of her life. There was no exhaustion here, no drained, overworked nurse struggling to keep up. There was only a woman whose spirit ignited for someone who wasn't me. I didn't realize I was holding my breath until my vision blurred and the screen dimmed from inactivity. My hand shook as I placed the phone back exactly where she'd left it, careful not to disturb a single angle, because in that moment I understood the truth was already here. I didn't need confessions or excuses. All I needed to do was follow the light, the glow of that phone, straight to the place where my marriage had been quietly buried. And whether I liked it or not, I was about to start digging. By the time her car finally pulled into the driveway, the silence in the house had grown so thick it felt alive, wrapping itself around my chest and squeezing until I could barely breathe. I watched from the living room window, the headlights briefly illuminating her face, calm, composed, almost rehearsed. She opened the door with that same light, careful smile she always used when she wanted to appear relaxed, but her eyes darted too quickly around the room, as if searching for hidden traps. She set her bag down with deliberate slowness, as though buying time before we spoke. "Long day," she sighed, avoiding my gaze, untying her shoes like it was the most important task in the world. I asked, gently at first, "So, how was surgery?" Her shoulders stiffened, just for a fraction of a second, before she launched into a story. It came out fast, almost too fast, stuffed with technical terms and step-by-step details that sounded like they'd been plucked straight from a medical drama script. Every word felt polished, as though she practiced in the car mirror before walking in. But I wasn't listening to her words anymore. I was listening to the gaps, those tiny moments where her mind seemed to rush ahead of her mouth, scrambling to remember what she'd said last. She reached for a glass of water, and her hand trembled slightly, not from fatigue, but from the weight of knowing she was being observed by someone who wasn't buying it. I asked her a follow-up question, one so specific it should have been second nature if she'd truly been in the OR. Who was the assisting nurse tonight? She hesitated. Not the natural pause of memory, but the sharp, cold silence of someone who had to build an answer on the spot. She finally named someone too casually, and then quickly tried to redirect the conversation to a joke about the hospital cafeteria's terrible food. But her voice cracked in the middle, and that sound, that tiny fracture in her control, told me more than her entire story. I didn't push. Not yet. I let her talk, let her weave her lie thicker and thicker, knowing that the thicker it got, the harder it would be for her to escape it later. What she didn't know was that earlier that night, while she was in surgery, her phone had been in my hand. I'd read the messages. I'd seen the timestamps. I'd seen the photos, and none of them were taken in an operating room. She thought she was walking into the same marriage she'd left that morning. But what she didn't realize was that I wasn't just her husband anymore. I was her silent witness, her shadow, tracking every word and waiting for the moment her own tongue would become the rope that tied her to the truth. The next morning, the light creeping through the blinds didn't feel warm. It felt like a spotlight, exposing every detail I hadn't wanted to see the night before. She was still asleep, her breathing slow and steady, one hand loosely gripping her phone like a lifeline. I sat at the edge of the bed, watching her, the weight of everything I knew pressing against my ribs. There was a time when I would have brushed a strand of hair from her face, kissed her forehead, and let her rest. But now, I was counting the seconds until that phone slipped from her grasp, until I could see what else she had been hiding. When she stirred and reached for her scrubs, I noticed her movements, too cautious, too deliberate, as if she was already anticipating questions I hadn't asked yet. Over coffee, she began painting another picture of her exhausting surgery shift. The words spilled out, soft and measured, but every detail felt curated. It was a kind of story designed to be airtight, except for one thing. She forgot her own lies. She referenced a patient she claimed had been discharged days ago, a detail she herself had told me earlier in the week. The moment the words left her mouth, I saw the flicker in her eyes, the recognition that she had tripped over her own narrative. I didn't confront her immediately. Instead, I slid my phone across the table, the GPS map open, the little blue marking her exact location at the time she was supposedly scrubbed in. Her hands froze on the coffee mug, and for a long, quiet moment, she didn't even blink. Then came the scramble, half-hearted laughter, a weak attempt to turn it into a joke, a "you really think I'd..." that died halfway through because she could see I wasn't smiling. I stayed silent, letting the weight of the truth settle between us like a third presence in the room. What she didn't realize yet was that the GPS was only one piece of the puzzle. There were screenshots, call logs, and one video I hadn't even told her about. I wasn't looking for an explanation anymore. I was waiting for the moment she'd realize she was already caught, that her story had collapsed before it even began. She didn't even touch her coffee after that. Her fingers kept circling the rim of the mug, her eyes darting anywhere but mine. The air between us had shifted. No more playful banter, no more soft excuses. This was the part of the story where she realized she wasn't in control of the narrative anymore. I leaned back, letting the silence stretch, because I knew that in silence, people either confess or crumble. Her first instinct was to double down. She tried to twist the GPS into some kind of malfunction, claiming she had been near the hospital, but not inside, because of a staff-only entrance that didn't register on maps. But the problem was, I had already pulled the hospital's own security footage for that time, and she wasn't there. The truth was circling her like a predator, and she could feel the teeth closing in. Finally, her tone shifted. She went from defensive to desperate, from justifying to pleading. She reached for my hand across the table, her eyes glossy, her lips trembling with the beginnings of an apology. "It wasn't what you think," she whispered, the oldest lie in the book. I let her hold my hand, but I didn't squeeze back. I needed her to keep talking, to let every piece of the truth fall out in her own words without me forcing it, because the more she spoke, the more cracks appeared in her story. And then she slipped. She mentioned his name. Just once, soft and quick, like she hoped I wouldn't notice. But I did. That was the moment her patient turned into a person, and that person wasn't lying in a hospital bed. He was somewhere else, somewhere that made her light up in ways I hadn't seen in years. I didn't tell her I had already spoken to him. I didn't tell her that his version of events was sitting in my phone in the form of voice notes and screenshots. Instead, I leaned forward, finally meeting her gaze, and said quietly, "You've been telling me half the story. I already know the rest." Her grip on my hand faltered. The color drained from her face. And in that instant, I saw something I hadn't expected. Not guilt, not shame, but fear. Not fear of losing me. Fear of what I might do with the truth, that if this sounds like your life, stop pretending you're fine. Stop hiding it like I did. Subscribe, not for me, but for every person who thought they were crazy, until the truth finally shattered them. You're safe here. We see you. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't throw anything. I didn't list the timestamps, the screenshots, the messages where she was suddenly wide awake and overflowing with warmth for someone who wasn't me. I just sat there and let the truth settle like dust on a room that hadn't been touched in years. And when I finally spoke, my voice sounded like it belonged to someone older, someone who'd already lived through this once before. I told her I believed the version of us that used to exist, the one where she came home and fell into my arms, the one where exhausted meant she needed me, not a reason to disappear behind a glowing screen. And I watched the words hit her like small stones, not enough to shatter anything, but impossible to ignore. She tried to build one last bridge, stringing together apologies that never reached a verb, promises that depended on me forgetting everything I had learned. She said she'd been confused, said work had swallowed her, said she didn't know when the lines blurred, and I realized she was still narrating a life where my job was to be convinced. I told her there was nothing left to convince, only choices. And for the first time since this began, I saw the flicker of something real in her eyes, not guilt, not sorrow, but recognition. She had finally run out of places to hide. I slid the phone across the table, not to accuse her, but to end the conversation about whether I'd imagined it. The thread was open to the last unread message, a bubble that still glowed with the residue of a night that was never mine. And as her thumb hovered above the screen, I understood that proof doesn't fix anything. It just makes the silence honest. I told her I didn't want revenge and I didn't need confessions. I wanted air I could breathe in a house that didn't feel like I was borrowing it from a stranger wearing my wife's face. And she stared at the floor like the answer might be there if she just found the right piece of tile. The seconds stretched until they felt like a hallway I had to walk down. And somewhere in that quiet, I realized the ugliest truth of all. There was no sentence good enough to end what we'd already ended. No fight that would make the broken parts look like a design. No apology that could trade places with the night she chose to be alive for someone else. I stood, not with triumph, not even with anger, but with the slow, steady calm of a man who knows which door leads to oxygen. And I told her I was going to take a few days, that the house would be hers, that the dog would stay because stability matters to the creatures who didn't choose this. She nodded too quickly, as if she'd practiced a gesture in another life, and I understood that sometimes the cruelest part isn't the lie. It's how easily the world rearranges itself after you hear it. I packed a bag without the ritual of endings. No photos, no souvenirs, just a change of clothes and a toothbrush, the kind of things you take when you don't know where you're going, only that you can't stay. At the door, she said my name like it might pull me back into the scene, and for one suspended heartbeat, everything we were flickered, a slideshow in reverse, first dates, first keys, first late-night groceries, and I almost believed I could rewind far enough to find a version of us before. Fatigue became a costume, and joy became a secret. But the gravity broke, and I stepped outside into colder air than I expected, the kind that makes your lungs ache in a way that feels like proof you're still here. The street was quiet, the sky the color of a bruise about to fade, and I realized there wasn't going to be a dramatic ending. No slammed door, no cinematic breakdown, just a road, a horizon, and a heart learning the difference between being exhausted by someone and being exhausted for them. I didn't say goodbye because it wasn't the right word anymore. Goodbye suggests an ending you can hold, something with edges. This was different. This was a silence that finally told the truth. And as I walked to the car, the phone in my pocket buzzed with a message I didn't read. A little burst of light tried to drag me back. I let it buzz. I let it die out. I turned the key, the engine coughing awake like it, too, had been asleep for months, and the mirror of the house shrank to a shape without a name. Somewhere down the road, there would be explanations and paperwork and a long, slow work of unlearning the habits that kept me standing in a room that was burning. For now, there was only breathing and the quiet knowledge that the next story I told about myself wouldn't begin with the words, my nurse wife. It would start with my own name. And somewhere between the first red light and the first mile that didn't hurt, I understood the hook I hadn't known I was writing. The truth didn't end me. It handed me the first chapter one hadn't been allowed to live till you come this far. That means something. You felt this. You lived it. Maybe not this exact story, but your own version of it. So if you're still here, still breathing under the weight of something they'll never apologize for, hit subscribe. Because no one should walk through this kind of betrayal alone. And if no one else says it, I will. I'm glad you're still here.